Good morning. Today is Monday, March 17th, 2025. We know in great detail every item, every utensil, every object that was made for the MIshkan, the sanctuary that traveled with the Jewish people through the desert and into the land of Israel, and eventually 400 years later, it became the Beit HaMikdash, the permanent holy temple in Jerusalem. But this was the modular, movable version for the first 400 years or so. And due to the last 3 weeks' Torah portions and the next 2 weeks' Torah portions, a total of 5 portions, we know the size of every object, we know the material that was used, we know how many were needed, like, for example, how many boards were needed for the walls, how many sockets, how many tapestries. We know every single detail, and we know precisely how much material was used. We know how much gold, how much silver, how much copper, no more, no less. Everything is described to us. We have a full, detailed, exact inventory of everything connected to the MIshkan. But there is something striking about this detailed, accurate inventory, not about what it contains, but what it is missing. So first, let me just tell you something about myself, my personality. It's just my habit, my way. When I go to a store, it could be a grocery store or a hardware store or really anywhere, and I need to buy something. So almost always, I buy 2. Because if I need it now, maybe I'm going to need another one. So I don't want to run out. So I like to have an extra ready. That's just the way I am. Now, I have to confess to you that I also have a bad habit. And that is, when I see that we've run out of something at home, I often forget to check the closet where we keep the extra ones. And I go out and buy it, and then I come home and find out we already had the extra one in the closet. Marcy gets a little perturbed at that. It's a shortcoming. I have to correct that. But in general, I like to keep a backup, and especially if something is important. I like an extra. Every single object in the MIshkan was important. But I want to share with you something, an insight that I heard from Rabbi Yissocher Frand, who quotes the Siporno, who says as follows: in the Beit HaMikdash, that is 450 years later, when the permanent building was built, and they had to raise the funds for that, and the same thing happened when King Herod reconstructed the second temple another 700 years later. They had to collect money. They collected much more than was actually needed. Much more. Not like the MIshkan, where the amount that was used was exact, no more and no less. And the Talmud explains the difference. It's a Talmud Yerushalmi. The Talmud explains, because in the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, they had backups. They had duplicates and triplicates. You have an Aron Kodesh, the Ark. It's very, very important. What happens if it gets dented? What happens if it wears out? What happens if something happens to it? So you have an extra. You have an extra in storage. Everything wears out over time. We're talking about hundreds of years. And any kind of serious enterprise, you have an inventory of spare parts in case something breaks, in case something wears out. In my house, at any time in my house, we have several different containers of mustard. Mustard is very important in my house. And we have Dijon mustard, and we have deli mustard, and we have several different kinds of mustard. And we have backups because you can't run out. What are you going to do? You're about to eat a meal and you need the Dijon mustard or you need the deli mustard. And one doesn't easily substitute for the other. Anything important, you have backups. And the Beis HaMikdash had backups and extras. Why did this problem not exist in the Mishkan? Why is it that there was no duplicate object? Because we know exactly the object. They're listed. And we know the materials were only enough exactly for that one set. What would happen? You're in the middle of the desert and you need a new Mizbeach. You need an altar. Amazon doesn't carry a copper altar to offer korbanos delivery to the desert. What do? So I want to share an answer that Rabbi Yissocher Frand gives, and he actually gave this answer, and I've shared it before, in answer to a different question. The Torah describes for us the Aron, the ark. And the Torah describes that held the luchos, the 2 tablets of stone on which are engraved the Aseret Dibros, the 10 Commandments. And the Torah describes that it was really 3 boxes. One fit inside the other. There was a wooden box, and then inside there was a solid gold box, and outside there was a solid gold box. Now the 2 gold boxes were very, very thin because they were really just a covering. It was really wood. The term we would use is it was gold-plated. It was wood with a thin layer of gold on the inside and a thin layer of gold on the outside. So what you saw was gold, pure gold, but the main structure was wood. So one of the classic commentators asked the question, come on, the Aron, the ark, it was the most important object. It was the focal point of the whole thing. Don't you think you could have splurged for solid gold for the Aron? Gold-plated? Why not solid gold for the most important object? They have plenty of gold. So this commentator, Das Zakenim, says, remember that the objects in the Mishkan had to be portable. For 40 years, the Jewish people traveled. And when they traveled, the Mishkan was disassembled into pieces and had to be carried. And if the object was solid gold, it would be too heavy to carry. So it was made gold-plated to make it easier to carry. And the important lesson we learn from that is even though it may have been more appropriate for the importance of this object to be solid gold, but it is also a consideration, just as important, maybe even more important, not to overburden the people who have to carry it. And that's why it was gold-plated. Solid gold may seem like it would be more appropriate. Gold-plated was better, because it was easier on the people. Rabbi Frand says this is the reason why there were no doubles. There were no spare parts in the Mishkan. Because someone has to carry this stuff. If they had doubles of everything, it would be double the carrying, double the schlepping, double the weight, double the effort, burden. And therefore, they wanted to make it as light as possible. And if something would break or would wear out, they would find a way to either fix it or to replace it, but they didn't carry it with them because of the concern of not creating too much burden on the people who would carry it. And this is a very, very important principle in all of religious life. Don't be a tzaddik on someone else's back. Don't think that you should serve God scrupulously and punctiliously in a situation where it causes inconvenience or burden on someone else. Rabbi Yisroel Feinstein, one of the greatest scholars of the modern era, lived with his wife on the Lower East Side. They lived a very simple life. And he would be sitting at a table and learning Torah. And you can imagine the depth of his learning and the productivity, because he was answering questions, life and death questions, to people all over the world. And he's sitting and learning. And Rebbe Feinstein would say, Reb Moshe, dinner is ready. And he would close the book in the middle of a sentence, and he would get up and he would go. He didn't wait to finish the pasuk. He didn't wait to finish writing the letter. He didn't say, in a moment. And what he was doing was perhaps answering a question of life and death that someone needed to know, or coming up with a novel idea to answer a question that nobody else could figure out. But he never let that be a burden on someone else. And when she said dinner is ready, he closed the book immediately. Not when he finished the line, not when he finished the pasuk, not when he finished the page. Immediately. He never allowed his scholarship to be a burden even for a moment on someone else. And of course, if someone would ask her, would you mind if your husband spends 5 more minutes just to finish this thought, this idea, this page? Of course she would have said yes, but he never asked that question. Rabbi Yisroel Salanter, who lived in the late 1800s, he died in 1883 in Europe, and he was known for his great scholarship and piety, and especially for his sensitivity to the needs and feelings of others. Now listen to this story. He once came to someone's house for a Shabbos meal. So, okay, Shabbos meal, you make Kiddush, and then you go wash your hands for Netilas Yadayim to get ready for Hamotzi. And when it came time to wash the hands, Rabbi Yisroel Salanter, he only washed the tips of his fingers. Now we know that the halacha is, the rule is, you're supposed to wash your whole hand up until the wrist. And it's very strange that this great rabbi who's so punctilious and so careful in observing every jot and tittle of Jewish law, he just did the ends of his fingers. He just washed the end of his fingers. So after they made Hamotzi, somebody asked him, why did you do that? And he answered them, this was before running water inside the house. He said someone in the house, a worker, a maid, someone had to walk down the hill and draw the water and carry the water back up the hill to the house. He did not want to be a tzaddik to insist on the maximum amount of water to wash his whole hand up until the wrist, because it would cause her to have to carry more water up the hill. He relied on the lenient opinion, just the edges of the fingertips was enough. This applies in every area of religious life. And the idea is you can only serve God properly if you are also aware and sensitive to the effect that your actions have on someone else, because the two are inseparable. If you are not thinking about any kind of burden or difficulty that you are, or inconvenience that you're causing someone else, you're not serving God properly. And that's what we need to try to do. We need to try to remember that there were no duplicates in the Mishkan. No doubles, no backups. because someone had to carry them. And a person should not be a tzaddik on someone else's back. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.